Who should we blame for the opioid epidemic? Purdue Pharmaceuticals or someone else? Why does Texas have fewer opioid deaths? How did the opioid crisis get so bad so quickly? Welcome to the Crossover Connections with Jack Wang podcast. I'm Jack Wang, a scientist and college professor at an Australian university. And on this podcast, we talk about the overlap between science, technology, and productivity, and how all of these themes and news headlines are connected in more ways than we anticipate. That brings me to the first article I want to deep dive into today, which is an article outlining the origins of the opioid epidemic, and it was published initially as a working paper back in 2019 in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. This really highlights something very interesting about the triplicate state. A triplicate state in the USA is a state which had stricter regulations on prescribing certain kinds of drugs, and essentially it wanted to deter doctors from prescribing drugs that may be a little bit too dangerous or a little bit too addictive. So it says here that there are 3 copies of every prescription, especially if they're Schedule II controlled substances, of which many of them are opioids. And the physician had to keep 1 copy on record. The patient took 2 copies to the pharmacy. The pharmacy kept 1 and sent the 3rd copy to the state drug monitoring agency, and the state agency maintained a database from these forms to monitor and investigate prescribing irregularities and diversion. And triplicate states included California, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New York, and Texas between the years of 1961 and 1988. All of these programs eventually lapsed because we're talking about bits of paper, right? This is like back in the Stone Age, 3 bits of paper that then fed into a agency database of some sort, which needs to coordinate with all of these doctors. But nevertheless, these states had this idea that we needed to deter physicians from prescribing these maybe overly addictive drugs, Schedule II controlled substances, which again includes many opioids. What the internal memos from a pharma company called Purdue Pharma, which had a new drug in its pipeline, OxyContin, one of the earliest precursors of the very addictive opioids back in 1996. And like many drug companies, they wanted to market this drug for it to have a chance of succeeding. And indeed, it does have a proper use. It does help manage pain, especially in short, controlled dosages after surgery, for instance. In states which had this triplicate program where the doctor had to have a copy of the prescription, the patient had 2 copies, 1 would have to be taken to the pharmacist where they get the drug from, and that gets then sent to the state agency. Those states were unlikely to take off. So being a business, they decided to ration their marketing resources and said, look, if the doctor is within a triplicate state, let's not bother sending out all of our reps to these triplicate states with this extra regulatory oversight. Let's purely focus our marketing dollars on those states which don't have this rigorous oversight system in place, don't have this triplicate check, triplicate prescription copy system in place. Only focus on what we call the non-triplicate state for their marketing strategy. The article goes on to talk about triplicate states are mentioned repeatedly in Purdue Pharma internal documents as being important barriers to OxyContin prescribing, with lower expected returns from marketing spends. And as a result of that, less marketing was targeted to triplicate states. And in fact, the product OxyContin should only be positioned to physicians in non-triplicate states. This then provided a blueprint for people to go through and figure out exactly which areas of the United States were hit worse by the opioid epidemic in the ensuing years, what correlation that may have to marketing dollars spent on this kind of thing in the non-triplicate states. So again, these are the states without that prescription monitoring system of 3 sets triplicate. The deaths per 100,000 went up dramatically between 1997, especially all the way to 2017 at the time of the study. Triplicate state, those states which had those more aggressive monitoring system for prescription, they had an even flatter kind of rise. Now, it's still an upward trend, so this is not great news for any state, but certainly the states that didn't have the regulations around more scrutiny on prescriptions, they not only had more deaths, these deaths were the result of deliberate marketing efforts to funnel more resources to talk about the opioids in those states because they knew it would be better bang for buck. As distasteful as that sounds, their marketing for physicians in those areas would be more likely to result in a sale of Oxy because those physicians had less forms to fill out. It was that simple. This opioid epidemic really began due to a aggregation of resources for marketing in states with less regulation. That all leaves a very bad taste in my mouth as I'm reading about this, but it is quite interesting on a driving past a car crash on a highway kind of way, in that this is how it all began because of marketing dollars for a very addictive drug. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Wang. Hope to connect with you again next time around.